The biggest criticism was that you didn't get your gonadotropins checked, your FSH and your LH, because if you were on TRT, presumably these would be in the gutter. So they think you were trying to like skirt around it by not getting those checked. So Thomas ended up getting a follow-up where he got his FSH and his LH checked, and they are in fact.
What's up guys, Derek, moreplaysmoredays.com. Today we're going to be doing a follow-up to the last Thomas DeLauer video. So if you saw my first one, you'll know I deep dove into his blood work and kind of picked apart his CBC, his metabolic parameters, his endocrinology, most notably his testosterone levels, and how low they were given his body composition, his overall musculature, his historical like fitness model endeavors and whatnot. Like the way he looks is not reflective of his testosterone levels whatsoever. And he was coincidentally missing his gonadotropins. He didn't have his LH or FSH on there. So there was just red flags flying all over the place. His, hematology profile was like significantly elevated, almost to the point of erythrocytosis. He had low iron, which would be indicative potentially of therapeutic phlebotomy. He had low T. He was missing the LH and FSH. There was like red flags all over the place. And he actually reached out to me to collaborate. Now, a lot of people saw the public comment on the YouTube video about, like, nice video, dude, like, let's collaborate. But he actually reached out to me privately, and he literally went and got blood work done the next day after seeing my video, sent it to me to go through, and now I have a second blood panel that we're gonna go through with you guys on the channel with the gonadotropins in there, the LH, the FSH, and updated total testosterone, a free testosterone, which was missing in the last one as well as updated CBC, metabolic parameters, thyroid, iron, etc. And we're gonna be diving into it with you guys and with Thomas on the channel. He's gonna be coming on. We're gonna be talking about it, and I'm gonna give you my take on it. We're gonna get his take on the explanation behind certain biomarkers, and we're gonna delve into some good information about hormones, just general health practices, diet models, lifestyle, etc. And it is going to be a very informative video. You don't want to miss it. It's a bit of a long one, sort of like a long form podcast, but I think you guys will find it informative and enjoy it. And obviously anyone who enjoyed the first one is going to want to see his updated blood work and is going to be as interested to see it broken down as I was waiting to get it from him. And just a quick side note, this was a very gracious gesture of Thomas. Like, he didn't have to, acknowledge my video. He didn't have to, he very politely responded and said it was actually good. It was very flattering, his response to me. And obviously flattering that he thinks my content is good enough to go get his follow-up panel done and give it to me privately to go through on my channel with you guys, with him on it. So very cool opportunity for the channel and for the growth of the brand and whatnot, and for us and everybody in the community. And I'm stoked to bring this panel to you guys, get some of the red flags addressed, and kind of dig into this. So thank you to Thomas, and let's get into it.
We can basically just go point by point through your original labs. And I think there's a lot of stuff you mentioned to me afterward that give a lot of strong context. And I know you don't really actually care that much about proving, the whole point of the video was more so to show your biomarkers and show your overall health status in relation to your, diet model and whatnot. But there's a lot of context people don't actually know about why your biomarkers are the way they are, that I think would really, be valuable to elucidate, because some people think that they just see this blood work and there's a lot of red flags, obviously, as you saw through my video, and it's hard to argue against it in some capacity, but there's a lot of context he gave me after the fact that I think is very key to own in on. So maybe we can just go through your original one, and then you can sort of give me the context that you gave me to the audience here, and then we can go into your. Thomas actually was gracious enough to get a second follow-up panel for me to go through on my channel for you guys, that we can then show gonadotropin levels and stuff like that, which is more gives even more context to the situation. And let's see. So obviously your lipid panel, I don't know if you wanted to get into, like, one thing that's a super obvious flagship marker of androgen use is guys will have crushed HDL levels when they use exogenous hormones. And for you, it's definitely in your favor that you have a high HDL. And you mentioned how you'd rather see it closer to 100. Like, historically, what is your HDL typically like?
No, it's usually, I would say 90, 95-ish. So it is a little bit, more what I would call on the lower end for me. But what's actually interesting context is right before, maybe it plays a role, maybe it doesn't, but I had gone to the doctor because I thought I had COVID.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was like, I ended up not. But that makes sense, first of all, with like my iron stores and everything. Like, there we go. Like, it was like, whatever, because now like my current iron stores are fine, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. So and then there's some argument that, of course, you know, like when you're dehydrated, when you're getting sick, there's going to be all kinds of things that get thrown off. And when you're on keto, then that's going to change the actual like lipid concentration that's going to be in your, anyhow. So either way, sorry, I'm trying to open up this other one like while we go here.
No worries. You can go ahead. I'll cut right to the part where whenever you're ready. So as far as the original blood test results, so we were looking at your HDL. We had a 74. You mentioned how historically it's a lot closer to 100. I don't know if you want, I don't know how long it would take to give an outline of a fractionated panel. I feel like that's probably above and beyond the scope of this video. Have you ever actually done like an NMR lipoprofile breakdown or anything like that on your channel by chance?
No, so I've done some pieces. So I've gone into like ApoE4 and I've gone into like oxidated LDL, which I think is like the biggest thing that people should look at, whether it's, you know, VLDL, no matter how dense or puffy it is. Like, if your oxidated LDL is bad, that's bad, period.
Okay. Because you mentioned in the video how your LDL was under 100 milligrams per deciliter. So subsequent fractionated panel you didn't think was really warranted. Is that kind of like a general rule of thumb you would advise for most people?
Not necessarily. If you know your dietary pattern and know know that your LDL levels are going to be in a specific range,
right?
I don't necessarily think it's warranted. But if you have other things, like if you're also testing C-reactive protein, if you're also testing these other possibly interleukins, and you're seeing things are elevated and out of whack, that would be the first thing I would go check, because that is actually, so like if you're doing keto, for example, and you have, you see your CRP is high, first of all, your CRP should not be high on keto. Like, it's pretty, blunting inflammation pretty well. So if your CRP is high and you also start seeing like these various, like, IL-1/8 is elevated as a big one, first thing I would go check is, your oxidized LDL, because if it's affecting your LDL, you're probably someone that should get off the keto diet, because that's just for whatever reason, could be some, receptor deletion in the gene pathway, whatever, that's making that happen. Who knows? But it's just something to be aware of.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's good to know, because I feel like a lot of people they assume that, this diet model should be the best for me because it's the best for this guy who's, the optimized health channel on YouTube or whatever. So, so getting into the comprehensive metabolic panel, this is kind of where like HDL is certainly in your favor if we were going to have some sort of natty or not, discussion. But as far as the comprehensive metabolic panel, so the glucose is not necessarily a giant red flag, other than like, obviously you're keto adapted. So is this something that you aren't concerned about at all? Like, I noticed you did not get your insulin checked in either this test or the subsequent one thereafter. Like, do you typically just look at fasting glucose and you expect it high from like that, whatever it's called, like the dawn?
Yeah, the dawn phenomena.
Yeah.
I expect it to be high almost always in terms of early morning. So just to give context with fat adaptation, and you get this, but just for the viewers, assuming we're recording right now, but for the viewers, it's what happens is you have a level of peripheral insulin resistance because your cells are utilizing fats. So a lot of times what happens is glucose gets reallocated to the brain. Common misconception is that the brain is running purely on ketones when you're low carb. The brain is still running on glucose, and you still need glucose. And that glucose is just getting reallocated and shuttled to the brain. So in the morning, you have this dump of cortisol, you have your catecholamines that are elevated. So you've got this just adrenaline that's basically driving up glucose levels. So it never shocks me to see my fasting glucose elevated. I've worn a CGM in the past, and I know that as soon as food is in my system, it drops, which tells me, okay, food comes in the system, so insulin goes up and my blood sugar stabilizes because it's a little bit higher in the morning, which is like the opposite of what you would see in someone that was having an issue. So it stabilizes, it might go up for a minute and then it stabilizes. And then the rest of the day, it's generally good. It's been a while since I measured my, HbA1c, because there hasn't really been a cause for it. But after this last video, there's been some people that have asked about it, so I probably will go ahead and do it. It's also just a good thing to test, because the last 2 blood works that I've gotten, my fasting blood glucose has been over 100. So that is usually a parameter for me to say, okay, I'll go ahead and check it, and maybe I'll start wearing a CGM again just to mess around with it.
Yeah. So like fasting insulin, have you ever, like historically, is that usually reasonable, even though you have a high fasting
You,
glucose
you
typically?
know, I don't even know if I've ever measured my fasting insulin, to be frank. Yeah,
Oh, really?
it's
Wait, like
never.
postprandial, do you have pretty good like glucose control
Oh
otherwise?
yeah, yeah. So usually, like, I'll maybe see a. Well, it depends on what I'm eating, right? So I'm fat adapted. If I were to
Yeah.
eat carbs, I'm going to jump way up,
Yeah.
unless I've been on carbs for 2-3 weeks for what's called mitochondrial biogenesis to sort of balance it back out. So what happens is the mitochondria. You might know this, and you probably do, but it takes. The half life is going to be 2-ish weeks, and it usually takes 2 or 3 half lives of the mitochondrial biogenesis before you end up developing an affinity for either glucose or fat. So if I'm fat adapted, I would have to go on carbs for like 4 to 6 weeks before carbs wouldn't skyrocket my glucose anymore. And
Right.
that's just something that I accept. So when I cycle off of keto, which I do regularly, I know that I'm going to kind of feel like garbage in response to carbs for a few weeks until my body readjusts.
Okay.
So generally, if I were to be adapted to carbs, I have a very good response. Normally with my typical diet, I'm not spiking my insulin like crazy. So I have very small bumps to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. So to give you guys context, Thomas's diet model, which is largely Mediterranean keto, right? As per your first video. But what you didn't mention, which is a huge major key, is the fact that you've been dieting down for several months at this point. So for you, like I thought your fitness model days were kind of like behind you. Like how come you mentioned you were like sub 2000 calories for like not just a short stint. It's been like a few months at this point.
Yeah, it's been, well, I mean, because first of all, just like anybody, I feel like between March and say May, June, with everything going on with COVID, like, yeah, I kind of relaxed a little bit and I was softer than
Right.
I wanted to be. So I needed to go back. And then a lot of it, as you understand, like with YouTube, like we have to go back and we have to shoot thumbnails. We have to do things like that. I have brand deals that I'm the face of a lot of brands. And as things have started to open up, as far as the economy and things like that, been like, okay, yeah. So now I'm having to have these back-to-back shoots for different things. So it's not fitness modeling in the sense where I'm going and shooting
Right.
magazine covers and stuff like that. But I needed to get, as lean as I could and kind of maintain that for a little while. Plus, I just like to do it to challenge myself now and then. And I did the necessary diet breaks and things like that. I would take a week or two off. But when you go into a serious deficit, you're gonna plunge some numbers for sure.
Yeah. 2000, I guess, just seemed a bit steep to me. But I don't know, like historically, is that how low you
Yeah.
usually need to go?
I've always been pretty low, and I've talked about it in a lot of my videos. Like even on a high day, like I'm really not much over like 28. I just don't. And a lot of it is okay. So if you go back to some of my other videos, I've got hundreds and literally thousands. So I don't blame anyone for not wanting to
Yeah.
spend their hours doing that. Who the heck wants to listen to me talk for more than 10 minutes? But when you look at decreasing caloric intake, there's a lot of metabolic benefits that go with it. We have this common misconception that we just want to have this raging hot metabolism all the time, but it comes down to like burn hot, die young. And a lot of what I talk about is from a longevity perspective. So I don't necessarily mind having a quote slower metabolism if you want to get granular with it, in the sense that like I live off of less calories,
Yeah.
but because I know that I'm getting, a telomere benefit out of it. I know that I'm getting a lot of other benefits that come out of it. That being said, my model of dieting, generally when I'm doing periodic fasting, when I back it out, net carbs or net calories, I should say, over the course of a week, that's what it kind of balances out to. So normally like my maintenance, I would do something like 2,800-ish to 3,000 calories on a non-fasting day, and then aggressively fast on a fasting day, so I'm not really measuring calories per day per se. It's more like what I look at over the course of a week through more of a wide angle lens, if that makes sense. So this has
Right.
been a little bit different because I've been doing a little bit less frequent fasting and doing a little bit more traditional deficit, which I don't know. I personally don't think feels as good, but it is what it is.
Okay. So yeah, I guess that was one of the main criticisms that I don't even think I touched on in the video was the fact that your glucose is high, which I think a lot of people would overlook is the from the keto diet probably. But then above and beyond that, they think because your IGF-1 level is totally reasonable, and to be honest, it's like above average for a guy who's fasting, calorie deprived on a carbless diet, having an IGF in the 200s, you would expect it to be lower. So a lot of people would think, and I know there's not really a way you can prove otherwise, but
Yeah.
they would think growth hormone use.
Yeah.
So at least you have the context to explain why it's the way it is. But like for you, when you're on a carb diet, is your IGF usually way higher, or where is it at usually?
No, it's usually about the same. I've always sat decently high on IGF. I mean, it's just kind of been the way that it is. But, when I'm on a carb diet, usually I do see my cholesterol go down. I usually see my, my T3, T4, I see, that all go up. So I definitely see an increase in overall, metabolism, if you want to call it that, which is normal. But I don't see a heck of a lot of change in anything else. I don't even see much of a change in testosterone. I do see a little bump in testosterone, but it is actually pretty widely known that a ketogenic diet can suppress serum testosterone levels. We don't really know what happens. We can go into this in a little bit more detail later, but at the tissue level, we don't really know what's happening at the tissue level.
Right.
There's a lot of different gene expression and things that occur with a keto diet. And by the way, I mean, it's important that everyone that's watching this knows that like, I'm not trying to just like throw a keto diet on anyone. Like this is what worked for me. So I know some people get tuned out by that and they don't always hear my context. Like I enjoy talking about it because it's fun for me, but
I don't think they realize too that it's not that you're doing it necessarily because it's the best overall. It's also in the context of adhering to this steep deficit is fucking impossible if you're not fat adapted pretty much. Like trying to operate and make videos on a daily basis and have a family and do all this stuff and have any level of like mental clarity and focus whatsoever. I can only imagine how impossible that would be sub 2,000 calories if you weren't doing the diet model you're doing. So
exactly. And I feel like that's exactly why having small undulations in my body fat percentage is, I usually sit under 10 almost always, but I will bump up to 12 sometimes. I'm usually between like 7 and 12, like always kind of hovering in there. And if you don't have body fat to actually utilize when you're fat adapted, you will feel like garbage because where else is it going to pull fat from unless you're like pounding fat bombs all day, which I'm not like a big fan of anyway. So and giving context, like the fat adaptation, you're basically increasing your oxygen carrying capacity. So you're getting more energy with every breath of oxygen. And that's not to be misconstrued as keto is magic and everyone should do it. It's just the way that aerobic metabolism works. When you're fat adapted, you take a breath, you're carrying more oxygen, mitochondria is getting more energy with each breath, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. So as far as like your actual body composition, like we know you stay super lean, you're always single digits basically. How much do you actually weigh typically?
Yeah. 183 to 188, somewhere in there.
How tall are you again?
5'9.5", 5'10".
It's still pretty heavy, dude, for that much muscle and the test levels too. So like I can see where the skepticism, like obviously where my video even came from to begin with, there's a lot of skepticism on it. But the hematology panel. So in the first video, you were like right on the edge of like you got to go donate blood pretty much. Yeah. And you mentioned how one thing you didn't give context on is like where you were situated during that result. And you mentioned to me after, maybe you want to give some context on how that may come about even in the context of somebody who's low T, relative low T, how you could still drive up that hematology panel based on where you live, your exercise, stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah. So first of all, altitude plays a big difference. So I spend a good amount of time in Tahoe at altitude. So that plays one part. But the other thing is, we have to remember with the ketogenic diet too, you kind of live in a state of mild dehydration. And we'll get to it when, obviously show my other panel where like my levels are a little bit lower, which one could say, did you just go dump blood? There's always going to be that argument. The fact is, I understand people are always going to make an argument one way or the other, but like with red blood cell count and everything like that, I do a crap load of cardio. Like I enjoy it. I always have. And I mentioned that in my video that, my original video, my red blood cell count, I ran my first marathon when I was 11 years old, and like I have been a long distance runner, and one could argue again that I was fat adapted at probably such a young age. If you want to go down the epigenetics pathway and that whole weird rabbit hole, there's probably a lot of interesting stuff that happened to my just mitochondrial function at a young age. One of the reasons I got into what I got into, lifting weights and ultimately, going on a bulk gone wrong where I gained a bunch of weight and just got sloppy, came because I was damaging my knees from running so much. So the point is, like, I like my endurance work. I like my cardio, and that drives that red blood cell count up. I don't have any other explanation other than that.
Yeah, one thing so as far as looking at the before and after guys, the first one you saw in the first video, he had a 5.8 red blood cell count, a 16.1 hemoglobin, and a 49.8 hematocrit. In the follow-up, he had a 5.69 red blood cell count, 15.4 hemoglobin, and 48.7 hematocrit. So still high normal, but not like to the point, not as severe as the first one. And when we get to the iron parameters, you got iron binding cap, UIBC, iron saturation. In the first one, you had low iron, and in the subsequent one, everything just resolved itself. Like how you would explain that in?
You and I talked a little bit offline on it. So my only thought originally with the iron piece was, okay, maybe I've got an infection going on. Maybe I've got something which can drive whenever inflammation is up. Because some people had pointed out on my video, which is actually good context too. They were like, hey man, I'm like kind of concerned with your iron levels. That can be an indicator of this, you know, XYZ. So I actually was like, okay, this is weird, but I know enough about, you know, what's called the root cause protocol and how, you know, different states of, you know, copper and zinc and all this other stuff can play a role in unbound and bound iron. And like, okay, so whatever I do on this next test, which again, we'll get to, I'm going to look at a broader iron panel and figure it out. And turns out like my serum levels resolve themselves anyway. And I know the question, okay, and it's important that people do know, and I don't even know if you know this, Derek, like I came out of the healthcare world and like what I worked in was predominantly providing like ancillary lab services to physicians back when I was overweight. So it was mainly like salivary cortisol testing and stuff like that. So I'm pretty familiar with reading labs. I'm also very familiar with like a lot of hormone replacement and how it's prescribed with physicians, right? So I can look at this and I can see, okay, what's going on? And I know that when people are on gear, a lot of times it can increase the iron uptake at the muscle level and drive down the serum level. So it's like, okay, sure. But then you go and you look at my, you know, newer blood work. If I were to just pop a bunch of iron tabs, it wouldn't drive up, you know, that number the right way, and it wouldn't fix the, you know, total iron binding capacity. So the best explanation I have is when I went to get that first bit of blood work, it wasn't because I was trying to do a natty or not discussion. It was going to the doctor for a checkup because I felt like crap. I thought that I don't even want to say the C word right now because it flags videos and the algorithm messes it up. But this pandemic that's going on, I was like, man, I really don't feel good. And my doctor said, well, it's been a while since we ran a panel. Let's run a panel. The numbers came back. I'm like, I should just do a video on this because these numbers actually look pretty good. So it wasn't anything contrived. I was like, let me just share my numbers. Come to find out, if you look up, it turns out that like if you're about to get sick or you're getting sick, it's pretty common for your iron levels to drop because inflammation goes up and it throws off this entire balance. So that's probably what happened, because here we are, a month later with this test, and everything's resolved itself as far as iron's concerned.
One thing that is impressive, by the way, is the fact that you're free, before we get into the gonadotropins and the test levels, is your T3 is good despite being sub 2,000 calories and keto. Is that abnormal for seeing guys in this kind of diet model? Like for me, that seemed very, very good, like disproportionately for what you've been imposing on yourself for the last few months.
No, it's super good point. And I think what happens a lot of times, predominantly with keto, okay, so we have to remember that a portion of T3 is utilized in glucose metabolism itself, right? So in order to utilize glucose, a portion of our T3 is actually there just for that. So when you are fat adapted for a while, you have an element of extra T3. I don't want to call it, extra, for lack of a better word, right? So that could drive up T3 levels a little bit. That was why I wanted to look at reverse T3 too, because like I'm always kind of curious, like what's happening there, that whole feedback. But if I was using T3, for instance, and doing that, you would see either a suppression in that, and then again, we know that T3 and the thyroid gland is kind of a ghost gland and kind of regenerates itself in a couple of weeks. It comes back very quick. You see this in people that are taking levothyroxine or straight T3. So the red flag would have been, some other markers like reverse T3 would have been out of whack. So it probably has something to do with being fat adapted. For years, I actually struggled with my T3 levels, and it was mainly like 2015-ish when I was doing a lot more fitness modeling, and I was sitting at a very, very, very low body fat to the point where it was like really causing damage. So perhaps it's a little bit of a rebound. I don't know. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on with the thyroid.
I think a lot of people who are skeptical would see this though and be like, your T3 should be lower. You're probably using Cytomel, and your TSH is not included in the test because you didn't want to show that it was crashed. But
Well, the initial,
we can't prove otherwise. So
and the original test wasn't like geared towards that. That totally
exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of people need to understand this is Thomas like allowing us to go through it in this context because he's a fucking nice guy, not because he was trying to prove with his original panel to my people like me that he is, natural. So
dude,
just the context.
I said this to you offline, but like I don't do collabs with people, but like I legitimately have like looked at your videos before and like this guy, like, I love the way that you actually rip people apart in a way that makes them probably second guess why they're alive in a real way, not just being like agitated. And it's so, like I'll leave comments when people like post videos and just be like, hey, lovely video, except for that Sean guy. I didn't even post anything on his because it's just whatever. But then I like to be able to explain this stuff. People are always going to have their opinions no matter what. Like someone that watches my videos or watched a couple of my videos and then watched your video or Greg's video or anything, they have their opinion, and the chances of me being able to get them to change their thought process or how they look at me is probably pretty slim. But I feel good about just being upfront and just being like, these are my numbers. Take what you want from them. I don't really care. I'm an open book. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the part that everyone wants to know about. So obviously in the first test, Thomas's testosterone level was 417 nanograms per deciliter. And there was no, you just got your SHBG instead of your free. And then a lot of people would argue that's kind of like either way you could calculate it if you wanted to, but most people aren't going to manually calculate it using that. And we just look at the SHBG, it's normal, which sort of reinforces this guy's probably natural. But then in the context of this guy could be on a keto diet that would otherwise be cranking it through the roof when you have a sub 2,000 calorie diet model and no carbs. And then the sort of otherwise amount it would have dropped sort of balances out in the middle. And everyone sees this 417. They think, how could you hold this much muscle naturally? And we're going to get into the new panel, which he actually, like the biggest criticism was that you didn't get your gonadotropins checked, your FSH and your LH, because if you were on TRT, presumably these would be in the gutter. So they think you were trying to like skirt around it by not getting those checked. So Thomas ended up getting a follow-up where he got his FSH and his LH checked, and they are in fact in range. So we have a 2.6 LH here and a 4.1 FSH. The testosterone level is actually a bit lower this time, 381 nanograms per deciliter with a 8.5 picogram per milliliter free T, which for all intents and purposes, I don't know if you've ever looked at the LabCorp way they report their free T direct, but it's like, it's really weird how they use a picogram per milliliter unit of measurement, which otherwise makes no sense if you actually looked at like what percentage of your total T should be free in the same unit of measurement. So anyways, so for all intents and purposes, this is like essentially a nanogram per deciliter free T of 8.5, which is hypogonadal by clinical standards, not just by like fitness bros who want like good levels. Like we're actually looking at like a not optimal population of people, and it's still clinically low. So the context in that, I would say, is obviously you didn't mention the first video, you've been dieting into the ground, which even like in the literature, you're going to find natural bodybuilders who prep for shows and are at like 6% body fat. They are going to dip into hypogonadal range just by nature of their diet model. So like, presumably that's how you would explain what's going on here, rather than like, that was something I was surprised you didn't touch on in the first video at all.
Well, and I'll mention it for your channel, but you have to understand that like, why would I?
Well, a lot of people would think you're unhealthy, and it sort of like discredited your information.
And I have a lot of people that are.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, man. I think there's a little bit of a lag, but a lot of the people that are watching my channel are really, really morbidly obese. And like, I don't exactly want them to be like, oh, I have to go on an 1,800 calorie diet to lose weight. I don't want, that's not the message I'm trying to spread. People that want to watch those, and I'm not like I'm trying to hide it from anybody, because I talk about it in my videos all the time, like how I surge this and that. But the people that are going to go check out that lab work video, I know it spawned into much more people going the natty or not route, but it was supposed to be, again, for the people that are heavy, that are skeptical about the keto diet, or they're concerned, and I want to like kind of help them. And I don't want them thinking they need to go do that, but it's also something that it's just kind of part of my life. Like I'm always dieting. I call it an obsession, right? I mean, like I'm definitely, like I even mentioned, like I'm an open book. Like, yes, like I get to the point where I'm even like orthorexic to a point where like I'm very anal about what I eat. I'm very obsessive, and I'm just as obsessive about my training. And I'm just, so it is what it is.
Right. Okay. So that's fair enough. Cause I guess, you know, in the context of, you don't want to make somebody think that they need to be dieting themselves into the ground like you are, like I can understand why you wouldn't want to put that out there like that. So that makes sense. So as far as the T being this low, like obviously a lot of people are going to say automatically, well, obviously you're on TRT and therefore you probably just cleared it out of your system and then this is why you have a low reading, or you're doing something else. The LH and FSH indicates that you actually have like either some like functioning pituitary activity presented with like this. You would not see a total, at least in range, with simultaneous LH and FSH in range in general, unless you were using like fertility drugs on top, like Clomid, and you're like tricking your body into producing LH and FSH, or some sort of like HMG or something like that. You know, like we're sort of getting into how much would people think you'd go out of your way to fake these results, I guess. So
it's also important to note that I went out and got this test the next day after your video, like no time to prep, right? Like I just like, or, you know, next day after I saw it. So it's
okay. That's good context. I'm going to blur out all of the personal details, but it says date collected October 27th. So
what I saw your video. I'm just like, you know what, this is like, I like you. And then I hit you up and I was like, I just got lab work done. Let's chat. Let's do this. Cause, yeah, I mean, it's like, I didn't want to have any time to go try to manipulate things. I just wanted to just get up and go and do it and see for my own curiosity where I'm at too.
Okay. I'm actually going to check the date of my okay. So October 26th. So it was the day after.
Yeah. Wow. So it was like, dude, let's just do it. Like, yeah.
Okay. Now a lot of people would circle back and argue like, no, he was obviously trying to plan ahead because he knew he would get called out and blah, blah, blah. But you know, it's how much you want to believe versus not believe at this point. You know, it's hard. Like you could fake these results, but it's going to be up to you guys if you want to believe them or not. And the fact that he even came on the channel to discuss it is obviously like very commendable. And it gives us a lot of insight into what's going on here. So the LH and FSH, like, I guess the main topic I think that would be worth discussing, as opposed to trying to prove if you're lying at this point, would be more so, what is your stance on, well, I guess historically, when you were 280 pounds, like, I don't know the backstory entirely about your overweight journey. Like, I have done the whole dirty bulk thing where I actually became, by definition, obese, but it was it was intentionally, because I thought it was the way to gain more muscle, because I was an idiot back then. So for you, was this like an actual, like, complete lack of activity, not trying to bodybuild, not do anything, and you were just obese? Or was this because you seemed like a reasonably muscular,
no, I was
280?
I was fat jacked. That's what we call it. Yeah. So no, it was, no, definitely. And I'm an open book about that. So it's, again, that's the problem with creating like a billion videos, is like people don't always get to see everything, right? Like I'm pretty open about it. So I went from, you know, playing all-state rugby and being an athlete in this, to messing up my knees, being like, okay, I'm going to get into lifting. Like I was a winger playing rugby, so I was light, right? So, and then okay, let's go ahead and let's put some muscle on. So when I'm, you know, 19, 20 years old, I'm messing around with like, you know, the pro hormones, like Superdrol, methyl 1 test, when they're all like over the counter stuff.
How many years did you use that for?
Not, dude, like 2 rounds. So I mean, it was like maybe 6 months.
What a lot of people don't realize is like those are steroids, and everyone's like, aha, gotcha. But it's like back then, the way they were marketed was such that this is a supplement at your local GNC
for sure,
to gain muscle. Like we didn't know this was a steroid over the counter. It was like some guy who's getting paid to be like, this is the best product right now for you. And then they would sell you some fucking gear. So
it's pretty much what it is. And the FDA came around like a couple of years later and like wiped all that stuff out. And you see the way, like the nature of those over the counter pro hormones, they are endocrine disruptors. One could argue that like my results probably could have even been effed from that, like here 10 years later, like it's, so point is, but anyway, so yeah, I was lifting a lot. I was trying to bulk up. I was, you know, following at the time, it was like DC training. So it was like, I don't know if you're familiar. So it was like very, very low volume, high intensity. And I wanted that because I was a lazy ass that was just like, well, I could go to the gym 2 to 3 days a week and lift for like 8 sets and be done. Well, then I get into, corporate healthcare and start focusing on making money in my career. And then it cuts down to 1 day a week, and then it cuts down to no way a week and no days a week. And I'm still eating the same amount. So I got up to maybe like 210, 215, like from 180-ish to, pretty stout, like looking pretty good. And then, sitting on my ass and high stress. Then I got into kind of the private equity world, and that was just stress. So the next thing you know, it didn't take long for me to be, close to 290 pounds. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I still had some muscle. So one of the things that's important to note is that, being that heavy, like you have some muscle, just A, being that heavy, but B, the little bit of lifting that I was doing in that much of a caloric surplus, I put on some muscle. So in essence, I've kind of been in like a 10-year cut. Yeah. So it's like, if you really wanted to get granular, because someone could say like, well, we had some muscle to begin with. I think I put on a bunch of muscle in like 2014 before I was like fitness modeling. I was really like going, balls to the wall on it. But from like when I was dropping that initial weight, like I had a lot of fat to burn, and I also had a good amount of muscle to potentially burn. So had I done like a traditional kind of bodybuilding style cut, I probably would have preserved a lot more muscle, but I was getting pretty aggressive at it to just lose weight. But
So as far as when you were dropping from 280 and getting into your fitness model days, by the way, this is a topic a lot of people would love to hear on, is did your fat loss stall at all even when you're at sub 2,000 calories? Because a lot of people have arguments about the metabolic adaptation principle and blah, blah, blah. Like, did you ever find you needed a diet break to like rev your metabolism back up? Or what was the, like when you were losing like 100 pounds literally to get to where you're at now, was there a point where you stalled out even though you were eating like
100%? Yeah, it definitely happened. But I'm familiar with the opposing theories on this stuff, right? And like there's so many different levers that we can pull. If people are
a lot of people would say, well, if you just eat less and you move more, it's impossible to not lose more weight. So
well, eventually no, because there's definitely, eventually you're going to get to a point where you're having to consume 300 calories, right? Like it's like you can't lose weight forever. I think the reason that I had success personally is because, yes, I did use a ketogenic diet. And mind you, this was way before the keto diet was ever a fad or anything, right? This was like, it was a thing, and it was was a thing, and like some bodybuilders would use it, some medical situations, whatever. There's a lot of evidence that shows that the ketogenic diet is super, super leucine sparing, which probably makes sense. So it's like preserving some muscle, which we know that the largest driver of the metabolism is going to be the muscle, right? So like I can be, and now to this day, flash forward, I can stay pretty lean because I've done a good job of preserving my muscle. I don't take days off. I take days off, but I don't skip days, right? I always stay on my routine. I work out like an animal. I maintain my muscle because I know that muscle is what's keeping me lean, and I just maintain it. And I know that if I lose it, I'm going to be in some trouble because, I still have that tendency to want to go eat like I used to. It's just, so as far as like the theory of like sort of that metabolic adaptation, like you're going to adapt. And like with fasting, that's my biggest concern with people that do fasting, is because they start fasting, they start skipping breakfast, and then they start doing it every day. And then I'm like, well, you're eating 2 meals a day now. So you're going to shrink to that adaptation. Then they're like, well, the next best thing I can do is start skipping breakfast and lunch. Now I'm just going to eat dinner. I'm like, okay, so now you're going to limit your daily caloric intake to your 700 calorie dinner. Like you realize what you're doing, right? You're walking a slow death. And I digress.
Okay. So as far as the test levels, like you mentioned how perhaps the pro hormones back then might have even screwed them up long term. Like your blood test results, I've only ever seen dieted down test levels. You've mentioned how in the first video you mentioned how historically they've never been that good. So like presumably you've tested them when you're not dieting though, like when you're at 2,800 calories. What are they at that point?
600-ish.
Okay. But like notably, they're not clinically hypogonadal.
No.
Okay.
No.
So this is like an expected result for you at this level of diet.
Yeah. And also let's give context. I have, a 3-year-old, I have a 6-month-old. I probably sleep about 5 hours a night right now. Like there's a lot.
I think a lot of people make the mistake that they think that because you preach, sleep hygiene and all these things that you somehow must be able to do it all yourself, even though it could be physically impossible for you based on your current lifestyle.
I would eat 0 things if I followed every single thing that I suggest people do for different mediums. Again, And I always try to say in my videos, like, my videos are not a coaching system. They are a resource. And I have an ability to articulate complex subject matter in a way that helps people gain an understanding. So people will get confused. Like, it doesn't mean that I do this entire thing. Like, I am also human. And I am also like, I've done a video about like the dark circles under my eyes. Like, yeah, because I went through a period where I didn't sleep for about a month with a newborn. Like, it'll happen. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Like, I can't even imagine trying to record, like, do a video every single day, work out, have a family, do this, run businesses. Like, it must be just absolutely absurd. So it's not like, you know, the context is definitely key here when you see some of these biomarkers where it's like it's not, some people, they see like a 381, and if like in the 600s, that's not horrible, I guess. Like, it's not optimal, but you don't seem too concerned about the like your free T. Like, you've already acknowledged that you expect it to be this low. And as far as the reason why it's disproportionately lower than your total, I would say, like, you didn't get your SHBG done in the follow-up. And just for the viewers, the reason the free T is low and the total is at least in range is because the SHBG is probably higher because of his keto diet and his low calorie intake, but that's self-imposed. It's not necessarily like genetically shitty or something like that, in case you were wondering. So as far as getting into TRT and whatnot, I guess progressing from the pro hormone stuff to your fitness model days, everyone sees those pictures. Like, you obviously have an impressive physique now, but even in like the 2015, 2016s era, I don't know if that was like your peak model days, but some of those pictures on the internet are just, what'd you weigh in those? Were you like, how much more muscles you have than you have now?
Honestly, probably 190-ish. Like, I wasn't much bigger.
But like a diced 190 at like
I was definitely
5'9", 5'10" is like.
No, I was shredded for sure. But you also have to remember that, like, this was during, all these pictures were like in a fairly compressed period of time. Like, the way the fitness industry works, like, I didn't have a long lasting career in the fitness industry, right? Like, you see guys like Steve Cook, they've been on covers for 10 years. Like, I had like my little shine of fame where I just had this consolidated because I looked really good for a period of time. I mean, I still think I looked decent, but like, I was shredded. And, you know, I know how to water manipulate. I had a lot of mass from coming down from being, you know, as big as I was. And I think we just kind of hit the sweet spot. I mean, you look at me now compared to then, it's pretty obvious, right? Like, I am smaller, and like, I don't deny that I've lost muscle. Like, my life has changed. My goals have changed.
Yeah.
I don't want to be giant. I just want to be able to be functional and play with my kids. And so it's been sort of like a big kind of progressive drop since then. It's not like I, you know, stay there and I peak there. You know, one thing that comes with my background and knowing what I know is I do know how to water manipulate really, really good and get myself crazy dry if I need to, which is a big piece of looking bigger. People would look at those pictures and they'd say, oh, this guy's 220, you know, like, I'm not, I wasn't.
Yeah. So you didn't use anabolic assistance for that period of time?
No.
Wow.
So it's
a lot of people call bullshit on that one. Like, at least now you have like I guess a reasonable body composition now, but back then, like 190 shredded at your height, people would be like, no fucking way.
Yeah, no, it's been, the thing is, I think when you put on as much size as like I did, I mean, I was a big dude, and then dropping it over the course of a couple of years, I mean, it is what it is. And that's just the thing, is like, people can say whatever it is they want to say. Like, I'm trying to be as open as I possibly can, like showing like my blood work and everything like that, like personal stuff. But yeah, it's, you know, and I've always had, like, there was a point where a couple of years ago where I got I wanted to go get a scan for like a pituitary tumor, because I was like, okay, why do I maintain like mass at relatively low T? Like, what is going on? My growth hormone levels like aren't out of whack. Like, am I having weird surges? I mean, it was a question, right? Like, why do I do this? And the only thing that I can think of as far as like what is working now and like why my T levels are where they're at now and why I still have as much size as I have now is, like we mentioned, there's a difference between like what your serum testosterone levels are and also what your tissue testosterone levels are. But I think the bigger piece of the equation is like mTOR manipulation and these other levers that are pulled. So it's important to know that when it comes to building muscle, like testosterone is a catalyst, but there's a lot of other levers that go into effect, you know, as far as like muscle protein synthesis with mTOR and just various gene expression that is going to allow you to build muscle. That's why people play with, you know, whatever SARMs and stuff like that to try to manipulate that. So who knows?
Yeah. Okay. So as far as getting into the, so like historically, pro hormones in your early 20s, short stint, didn't do anything throughout the fitness model stuff. Now, current day, you could otherwise have good levels, but you walk around for a big chunk of the year, essentially hypogonadal.
Yes.
So like you don't worry about that in terms of like some people would argue you might have a better, not only just be able to work more effectively and efficiently, like mentally, but also, build more muscle, do anything. Like I know your goal isn't build more muscle, but just
Yeah, for
overall,
sure.
even cardiovascular health wise, you may argue that you'd be better off with TRT. That's not something you are interested in, or what is your thought process on that?
I'm certainly not opposed to it. The thing is, I'm 32 years old, and like I know that if I go that route, I have to commit to that route. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my thing. I am not anti TRT. Like I would actually feel like it would probably make my life a little bit easier as far as like you and I have kind of talked about redlining all the time. But I feel good and I'm maintaining muscle. I have energy. I sleep pretty decent when I don't have crying kids. I feel good, and the lifestyle indicators aren't telling me that I need to. If it gets to a point where like I'm feeling like I hurt all the time and I feel like, all these signs that I should make that shift, then that's a little bit of a different story. I did ping my doctor, my primary care doc, and was like, hey, like with my levels where they're at, I sent them because of the lab test that I got. The second one, I went to walk-in lab and did it.
Have they ever been this low, by the way? Like the follow-up, we have the 381 total and the 8.5 free. And a lot of people watching are going to be freaking out. So
yeah, I don't think I've been this low. I've been in the low fours before, but I'm not quibbling over that because so many things can change. Like what's in the the serum at that very moment in time. But and just for the record, because people are going to say, did you doctor this document? Like I shared me like logging in, screen share of like logging in, like nothing's been doctored.
I can attest to the fact that it wasn't doctored. Like he sent me a screen share with his personal information on it, and he went through it like from the login screen to going in and going through it. So like that was a lot of transparency on his part and trusting me too, to not, blast personal information all over the place. So I definitely commend him on that, and certainly reinforces his credibility in this regard. So keep that in mind as you're watching. But anyways, continue.
Yeah, no, I lost track of where I was anyway, but so much for the keto diet. Doesn't help your brain, discredit all that. No, but I mean, it's, I guess at the end of the day, I literally don't remember where we were going with it, but
no, yeah. So you mentioned how you hadn't had your T this low before you talked to your doctor about it.
TRT, yeah. And I talked to my doc, and I was like, hey, like, what do you think? And of course, when you talk to a primary care doc, they're going to give you the most generic answer anyways, but I still pinged them. I shot him a text because I have them kind of on like retainer like that. So I texted him. It's like, my test levels where they're at, like, what would you say? He's like, well, here's the thing, like, with keto, like we've seen, like you've talked about and things like that, is you're going to see, like, as long as your lifestyle measures and everything that's measurable there is good, then like what's really the point for you? Like my libido is decent, but it's also down, when I'm in a caloric deficit.
I'm sure you notice a huge difference when like anybody who's dieting this hard is going to get a hit to their libido.
For sure.
That's just unavoidable. So
the crazy thing is it's quick when you come off, right? Like, I mean, anyone that's dieted aggressively knows that like within a couple of days of you like loading up on carbs, you're like, oh, okay, let's go. Like it's awesome. But so I mean, I guess candidly sit down my wife and be like, hey, should I go on? So I was thinking, and you're going to appear on my channel too, but talk about like, should I do TRT? Because like if I do it, I'm going to be open about it. I'm not going to go like do it and not tell people. Like I'll flat out tell my channel, I'll be like, hey guys, this is the route I'm going now. Because like there are certain things that can be detrimental to your health if you sit in a state of hypogonadism. And none of those other markers are really flagging me right now, but I probably should go get like fasting insulin checks and stuff like that. Because if I want to make a case for me using TRT, I want to make sure that I'm making a solid case for myself to do it.
Yeah. Because I think you could otherwise, for you, it's a bit of a more unique scenario because you could otherwise probably walk around with reasonable test levels if you wanted to. It's just this self-imposed state of macro and potentially micro, depending on, whatever you're eating, deficiency, micronutrient deficiency, where you're like, it's not like you couldn't otherwise be healthy clinically. It's just this way you're living that is imposing it upon yourself, which would then perhaps justify intervening somehow. But it's not like you have like primary hypogonadism to the point where You know what I mean? So the context in there is key. So I feel like this probably sums it up. Like, I don't want to grill you too much more. Like, everything else looked fine. Your IGF-1 was pretty much the same on the follow-up. Vitamin D, obviously fine. Growth hormone serum, I wouldn't expect it to be skyrocketed anyways. So everything looks good, man. And, you know, everyone's going to be skeptical still, of course, because, you know, frankly, most people can't maintain this body composition even with good test levels. So with low ones, everyone is going to, you know, justifiably be a little bit iffy on it. But obviously, you know, huge props for you to, especially even reaching out to me, a much smaller channel, to collaborate. Very much appreciated. Sure. I'm sure my audience really appreciates it. Helps boost the algorithm, as we always say. So thank you for coming on, and I guess we can cut it off here, man.